Violence and aggravated assault, strangulation. Stay with Fox 5 for any new details. We will put them online at fox5atlanta.com as soon as we get them.
A proposal already being hotly debated, $1.8 trillion to boost and expand safety net programs, and another $1.5 trillion in discretionary spending.
It's just the president's core economic plan. Long-term investments that will increase the productive capacity of our economy.
It also calls for funding Democratic priorities from $36 billion to fight climate change, $2 billion to address gun violence, and $30 billion to expand housing assistance. For Republicans, it's a non-starter.
This kind of spending will ensure that everybody's paying more for their houses, their rent, their groceries, you name it. Prices will go up.
The White House insists with increased taxes on the wealthy and corporations, its spending plans will be paid for, eventually. Republicans reject the premise, arguing rising inflation is already a warning sign the economy is in trouble.
Inflation occurs when you're throwing too many dollars at too few goods, and that's exactly what's happening.
Even a member of the Obama and Biden administration, Larry Summers, who was the director of the National Economic Council, has a warning. It starts off this way. We are printing money. We are creating government bonds. We are borrowing on an unprecedented scales. He goes on to say that the dollar is at risk. Inflation is now potentially going to skyrocket. Is Larry Summers wrong, Mr. Secretary?
This is a responsible budget, and importantly, all of the proposals for spending and investment in this budget are paid for. It's one of the reasons why, if you look into the out years, the deficit actually starts going down. But you can't get something for nothing. And in the near term, we know that we need to make major investments in our roads and bridges, in our education, in our health. We can't afford not to do these things because for decades, frankly, we've been disinvesting. We've been cutting in the things that make America strong. The president is looking around the world, seeing how other countries are not hesitating to invest in their future, and we're watching America fall behind. Just look at infrastructure. We're not even in the top 10 anymore, and we can't allow that to continue. So yes, this is a bold budget with major investments in the American people, but it's also a responsible one because the president has put forward how to pay for every penny of it in the long term.
What about the critics who...
Look, if you have a different category you'd like to put it in, that's fine. We should still do it, and we should do it as part of the American Jobs Plan. We think of it as infrastructure because infrastructure is the foundation that lets people participate in the economy. And as so many people watching this program know, when you're taking care of a loved one, doing some of those things because you don't have the right kind of care structure to look after them, and you can't even get a job because you're in this elder care situation, because somehow we're one of the only developed countries that doesn't take care of this, that's holding you back the same way it holds you back if you don't have a road or bridge to get to where you want to go. But look, if somebody has a different view on the categories, that's fine. That's a philosophical debate that I don't think is as important as the fundamental fact.
But that's not roads and bridges. I mean, that's something that people would think it is a good thing, but it doesn't meet with what average people think of ports, even water, lead pipes, repairing those things. There's a lot of agreement between Democrats and Republicans on those things, but where do you actually draw the line? What's not infrastructure?
This is called the American Jobs Plan because it contains a number of measures that are going to help Americans not only get jobs but thrive in our country today. And this is part of it. We think these things fit together. And of course, it's not unusual in legislation to take a number of different elements that are part of a related theme and move them at the same time because Americans can't wait for us to resolve a dorm room debate over which policies belong in which categories. They want us to just get it done. It's why the president's jobs plan is so overwhelmingly popular among the American people. Now we're trying to get Washington to catch up and to actually do something.
Well, when to talk about, but not part of a core physical infrastructure package. He also had a large section in there on research and development and manufacturing, something that's not considered initially as infrastructure. But we're working that bill right now on the Senate floor, the Endless Frontier Act. And so we're going to have bipartisan agreement there. He has a part of his plan that is incentives for buying electric vehicles. You know, that building out the infrastructure for electric vehicles, charging stations, we have that in our plan. But vouchers to purchase the automobiles and other things, that I think is something we need to discuss at a different time. And these are hundreds of billions of dollars in his plan. We just think we would be better off if we just looked at a core, solid definition that is traditionally thought of as infrastructure and move that to that next modernization to where we are the best and most technological superior infrastructure in the world.
So working on the definition of infrastructure as the deadline is now blown and continues to loom on this, but also about how to pay for it. Democrats say it makes sense to roll back cuts for corporate taxes. I tried to press the secretary on whether this is also going to mean rolling back taxes on individuals. But to the corporate point, he said there are billions of dollars in corporate profits that are going untaxed. Here's what Senator Dick Durbin had to say about the plan.
They don't want to touch the wealthiest and the big corporations who received a generous tax break under the Trump tax plan, but they haven't come up with an alternative. So I hope they'll join us in a responsible effort.
So are tax increases a red line for the GOP, whether we're talking about corporate or individual?
The tax cuts of 2017 led to the most booming economy that we had pre-pandemic. Here in West Virginia, wages up, more diversity in the workforce, more people working. It was working in terms of spreading out the economic growth all through all sectors of our economy. So I'm not going to vote to overturn those, but I can tell you we do have a plan. We have put over the course of the last year and a half trillions of dollars into COVID relief, and much of that is unspent. We say reprogram that. The administration has already reprogrammed about $2.5 billion into health and human services to help with migrant children. So we know they're not opposed to reprogramming COVID dollars and rescue dollars. Let's take a lot of those dollars, for instance, the unemployment that a lot of states are no longer extending in the $300. Let's take those dollars and devote those to something that's core infrastructure. That is part of our plan as well. We also have user fees in there. There's no reason that folks who have electric cars or hybrids who use the roads, there's no reason that they shouldn't, because they don't buy gasoline, don't pay into the gas tax, which is the traditional resource to pay for roads. But there's no reason why they shouldn't participate. So we have laid out the ways to pay for this, and I think it doesn't involve raising our taxes. We all know when you raise taxes one place, it's felt everywhere. And with the stagnation of our economy, we saw slow job growth this last month.
Well, ultimately, I want to get to the truth, but it's disappointing that they didn't look at it this more seriously a year ago. President Trump was saying that this was a possibility. Senator Cotton was saying that that was a possibility. I'm guessing that the intelligence services were suggesting that this might be a possibility. But I'm glad the Democrats, albeit a year later, are finally coming to the game and the realization that we really don't know, and we better darn well find out so that it never, ever happens again. And there has been a lack of cooperation from China. There's been a lack of cooperation and trust, really, in the World Health Organization, and that's problematic.
I want to play something from David Ash.
The community, there was almost no evidence that supported a natural zoonotic, evolution or source of COVID-19. The data disproportionately stacked up as we investigated that it was coming out of a lab or some supernatural source.
And Juan, as we've talked,
and cutting down the death rate. We were in the midst of a pandemic. So I think at that point, kind of this theory or that theory was very much secondary to what we had to deal with as the American people, what the administration had to deal with. And of course, there's politics involved here. I think there were lots of people in the Trump administration who wanted to distract from the poor job the Trump administration was doing with the virus in the United States by saying, hey, the Chinese are the problem. And the Chinese, even in terms of investigation, they're just bad actors. I mean, these people can't be trusted. If you tell the truth over there, you could end up in jail. So there's lots of politics involved in this. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so now the push is on. There seems to be some agreement. We have to get to the bottom of this for numerous reasons. And Jason, as you said, because if this surfaces again, to prevent it or to be able to deal with things moving forward. Here's what Andy Slavitt, who has been a special advisor to President Biden, especially on this coronavirus issue, said about investigating this week.
We need to get to the bottom of this, and we need a completely transparent process from China. We need the WHO to assist in that matter. We don't feel like we have that now. We need to get to the bottom of this, whatever the answer may be.
So there's been
a number of experts in the scientific and public health fields have run into a credibility problem. And part of that is because a lot of these organizations and experts have been incapable of saying, I don't know. Uncertainty is very hard to communicate, especially early on in COVID, when we don't know where it's coming from, when we're not yet sure of how it's transmitted. It's okay at that point for scientists, experts to say, we don't know. We think that you should be wearing masks. We think that you should be doing X, Y, and Z. We think it's transmitted this way, but we don't know. Because then when you really do know, you have the credibility to come to people and say, we know where this virus came from. We know what you should be doing to prevent the spread of it. I think too early on, there were too many experts who said, nope, we know exactly where this came from, or nope, we know exactly how this spreads, and wound up being wrong. And that means that now those same experts, when they're asking us to do things like take vaccines that we know to be safe, there are large portions of the public that look at that and go, you know, I'm not sure I trust those experts. And that lack of credibility, both with experts here in the U.S. and especially experts around the world, is a huge problem for dealing with global health problems coming down the road.
And to the virology from which the Wuhan virus may well have escaped. The Chinese Communist Party knows the answer to that. President Biden has a responsibility to ask Xi Jinping and demand that he does this.
Jason, are you?
Well, that's who does that. If they still refuse to listen, you take it another step. Tell it to the assembly. Now, in your English Bibles, you'll find the word church here, which was ecclesia, which should never have been translated church, but that's another story for another day. The word actually means assembly, and besides, by the time when Jesus was teaching this, there was no church. He says, look, if this person continues to wreck and ruin their life and maybe wreck and ruin other people's lives or their behavior, you actually take them to the community of people that know them and care about them, and you confront them as a community.